former New Jersey governor. Governor Christie, good to have you.
Neil, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Same here. So why aren't you in Iowa?
Neil, look, what we've decided to do this week is to work hard on our fundraising. We've had a number of great fundraisers this week, all here on the East Coast. And so that's what our agenda was this week. And I'm sure we'll get to Iowa at some point. But being one of 14 people tonight speaking for 10 minutes versus making sure that we have the resources we need to be able to win the Republican nomination, I made the choice to do that here on the East Coast.
All right. Now, we were talking, and half-kiddingly, and only half-kiddingly, Governor, that this idea that Hunter Biden's name is likely to come up a good deal tonight. And when many are arguing in your own party that it's time that we get the same attention to what that's about as we have to Donald Trump's travails. You stood out by saying it was time for a special counsel a long time ago, but you also said of the former president's troubles that he brought them on himself. What do you think?
Well, he did bring them on himself. There's no doubt about that. And in addition now, with the superseding indictment that was put forward yesterday, and I can tell you, Neil, from having done this work, as you know, for 7 years as the U.S. Attorney in the fifth largest office in the country out of 94, we did 130 political corruption cases against Republicans and Democrats over 7 years and never suffered a defeat. 130-0. I looked at that superseding indictment yesterday, and it tells me one very clear thing. They have a cooperating witness, at least one, maybe two, from inside the Trump organization that are cooperating and providing them with information that is in the indictment against the former president. And so this is, again, things that he brought on himself. And I think what our voters need to begin to think about is, we have a front runner right now who, when he gets on the stage for the Fox News debate on August 23rd, will be out on bail in at least 2 different jurisdictions, if not 3, between now and then. How are we going to beat the Democrats with a candidate who is going to be out on bail facing numerous self-inflicted wounds in courtrooms across this country? No one else wants to talk about that in the race because they're all afraid of Donald Trump. I've known him for 22 years. I'm never going to be afraid to tell the truth, Neil. And what I just said is the truth.
You know, Nikki Haley took umbrage to that, Governor. She says that she has taken on the former president and says, quote here, "I'm not obsessively anti-Trump like him," referring to you. What do you think of that?
Well, look, I have great respect and affection for Nikki. She asked me to come down and campaign for her in 2010 when she ran for the first time as governor, and then again in 2014, and we've been friends for a long time. But here's the bottom line. Nikki hasn't been able to figure out what it is her position is on Donald Trump. In one interview, she was both someone who thought he shouldn't run again, then she said she wouldn't run if he did, then she changed her mind, and again she said she wouldn't run if he did, and now she's running. So, you know, if she's not clear with the fact that she's been sending very, very mixed messages and hasn't spoken directly about whether Donald Trump is fit to be president, given all the things that he's done. And by the way, Neil, you know, a record that is very spotty. You know, he said he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare. He had Republican majorities in both houses. He failed to do it. He said he was going to build a big, beautiful wall across the entire border of Mexico. In 4 years, he built 52 miles of new wall. And the Mexicans haven't paid us our first peso. And he said he was going to balance the budget, which we all should be concerned about as conservative Republicans. And he added $6 trillion to the national debt. So it's not just about what he's done personally. It's what he failed to do as president.
So I guess I mentioned Nikki Haley, Governor, but I could extend it to Tim Scott. You've criticized him as well for his refusal to blame Donald Trump for the January 6th riot at the Capitol. You've gone on to talk about Ron DeSantis and his response to the Florida Board of Education and a new African-American teaching here. So it gives some the impression that you've got a scorched earth policy when it comes to other Republican presidential candidates way beyond Donald Trump. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm sorry, Neil, that I'm telling the truth. You know, I agree with Tim Scott about the new standards in Florida. And I think that what they've done is wrong. And worse yet, what I really criticized Governor DeSantis for was he said, I didn't have anything to do with it and I didn't know anything about it. Well, that's not leadership. That's looking out at what's going on in your state and saying you're not responsible when you're the governor. And look, on Nikki Haley and Tim Scott. Look, I was disappointed with Tim when he said that the president was not responsible for what happened on January 6th. The president invited all those people to Washington and said it was going to be wild. Then when he got there and they got there, he repeated the lie that the election was stolen, and we know that it was not. Then he asked all of them to march up to Capitol Hill and said he would march with them, except we know if Donald Trump's in danger of breaking a fingernail, he's not going to do it. So he went back to the safety of the White House, sent all those people up to Capitol Hill and told them that Mike Pence needed to do what he needed to do, or he was a disappointment to all of us. And then finally, while he watched all the violence going on Capitol Hill, he sat for hours in his dining room at the Oval Office and did absolutely nothing. Now, I don't know if that makes him criminally responsible or not, but it sure as hell in my book makes him morally responsible. And knowing Tim Scott as well as I do, Neil, what a good man he is, and he is a good man, and I consider him a friend. I didn't criticize him. I just expressed disappointment that he was unwilling to say the president is morally responsible for what happened on January 6th.
I wonder what you make of what Mitt Romney had said, that Republicans have to rally around someone to take on Donald Trump, that they didn't do that in 2016 when you last ran, and that was a mistake, and it set up Donald Trump to sort of pick off candidates, acquire all the delegates he needed, and win the race. What do you think of that?
Look, I don't disagree with Mitt, but we're in July of 2023. And when I look back, we had 17 people in 2 different debates in 2015. I think when we get to the Fox News debate on August 23rd, my guess is there'll be 7 or 8 people on that stage. So it'll be less than half of where we were before. And, I think there will be a culling of the field over the course of time. Mitt, I think, said that, if you haven't done well by February 26th, you should get out. I don't disagree with that, Neil. And I think that if you look at what I did last time, 8 years ago, when I didn't do as well as I wanted to in New Hampshire, in the beginning of February, I got out of the race and consolidated behind Donald Trump, supported him, chaired his transition, and worked to make him the next president of the United States, and we succeeded. And so I don't disagree with what Mitt said at all. I just don't think it's quite the time yet. And what Mitt said in his op-ed was he didn't think it was the time yet either. All
right, so he was referring to coming out of New Hampshire. Let's see where we stand. If you don't look like you're doing well, do what you did back then and bow out. One of the things I did want to discuss with you as well is what could potentially happen by May, when we're going to have this, the president on trial, if you can't push it back. By that time, Governor, it is distinctly possible if Donald Trump holds these numbers in polls, he could have accumulated enough delegates to be the party's nominee. And that would put the party in a bit of a pickle if it turns out, as you said, that the trial doesn't go well and other trials don't go well. Then you could have a convicted felon as your nominee. That is not out of the question, is it?
Not only is it not out of the question, it's likely. And Neil, it's worse than a bit of a pickle.
Could you support that candidate then in that event?
Look, I've answered this question a dozen times, Neil. We're not going to go back over it. I'm going to take the pledge in the debate that the RNC wants us to take, and I'll take it every bit as seriously as Donald Trump did in 2016 when he signed the pledge. And then when all of us were on the stage, we were asked to reaffirm the pledge by raising our hand. 9 of us raised our hands and 1 didn't, and that was Donald Trump. And so, look, here's what's going to happen, though, Neil. It's worse than what you're talking about because he will be indicted by the special counsel another time. I did this work, as I said, for a living for 7 years. You do not send a target letter to someone unless you intend to indict them. It's the last thing you do to give them an opportunity to come before the grand jury before the grand jury is asked to make a final decision on indictment. So there will be a 3rd indictment. And it seems clear to me that it is more likely than not that he will be indicted under the RICO statute, the racketeering statute in Georgia, for what he did in terms of interfering with election results in Atlanta. And so here we are. it very well could be when we get on that stage on August 23rd, he could be out on bail in 4 different jurisdictions and trials happening at least in 2 of them, if not 3,
then how could you in that event,
we get to the convention.
I get it, Governor, but how in that event, and I know you have addressed this subject, but I'm not clear on how far it would go. If you have someone who is facing all of that after May, after the May trial, and who knows what else after that, he would be, obviously in big legal trouble, but constitutionally he could still run. Now, you're a legal expert like no
Sure.
other. Is he, and can he continue to run? And if he becomes president, can he pardon himself?
This is totally uncharted territory, Neil. I mean, we've never seen anything like this. When Richard Nixon got himself in some measure of real trouble, he did what I think was ultimately the patriotic thing by resigning from office. And he did not put the American people through what Donald Trump is about to put the American people through in this situation. So I don't know the answer to that question, nor do I think there's anyone who knows it. We all just have theories now, Neil. But here's the thing that will correct it. Folks should vote for someone else. We have a number of good candidates. Look, I think I'm the best one of the group, obviously, but there's a number of good candidates here. Donald Trump should not be the Republican nominee for President of the United States, and he's done it to himself. And, I'm going to be on that debate stage on August 23rd.
Supporting that person for the nomination if by that time he has, acquired all the delegates necessary and all the baggage attached with that. If so, how you could accept that and that person as your nominee.
Yeah. I think, look, you know me well, Neil. You've known how much I care about law and order and right and wrong and telling the truth. So that would be an impossible task.
So let me ask you a little bit of that. Donald Trump seems to single you out a lot in his missives on his social media site, Truth Social. He said,
doesn't he?
He had said that you contributed to Mitt Romney's loss. He's raised this a number of times, that you were starstruck by Barack Obama during the whole Sandy Storm incident, which you worked with the former president to get New Jersey and the Northeast back in shape. When you hear that, and it keeps coming up, and this is the latest, what do you think of that?
Well, one, it lets me know that I am inside his head in a big way, and he is very worried about standing up on that stage with me on August 23rd. And secondly, I would just say this. My state, our state, Neil, because I know you're a resident of our state suffered the greatest natural disaster in its history and the second greatest natural disaster in the history of this country. And you bet that I welcomed the President of the United States when he came to see the damage, console our citizens, and offer to help us to rebuild and recover. That's what a responsible leader does. What an immature child does is to criticize someone for that. And this is the kind of self-centered, immature child that Donald Trump is. How could you criticize a governor? How could you do that for saying that I want to do everything I can to rebuild my state and to help every one of the citizens I was elected to serve recover? It's outrageous. And so, what we responded with, he made fun of me on that. So we sent out a picture of him with Hillary Clinton at his wedding. Now, I didn't invite Hillary Clinton to my wedding, Neil, and he invited her to the wedding. He gave $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation, and he donated to her campaigns numerous times because he put his own personal greed ahead of the good of the country. I will never do that. He does all the time.
I wanted to get your thoughts while I still have you, Governor. There's been much made of some of the pitfalls of some older established politicians. You saw the Mitch McConnell frozen moment speaking to reporters. There was the Dianne Feinstein seemingly lost trying to decide what she was supposed to do ahead of a vote. We've seen this come up again and again with President Biden, whether fair or not. Do you think there should be an age at which you can no longer hold office?
I think the better way to do it, Neil, is that we should have term limits. I served as a governor in New Jersey where I had term limits. 2 terms was all I could do. And I think if we made term limits for folks in Congress, 12 years in the House and 12 years in the Senate, that if we had term limits, that would eliminate a lot of this conversation.
But that wouldn't
and so
stop.
I think
That
what we
wouldn't
need to
have
do to make
stopped
the
a
country
private citizen, Joe Biden, the former vice president. To your point, I get it. From running for president, old guy, or for that matter, Donald Trump right now. I mean, there is a sense, depending on the individual, I know where you're coming from, that maybe that is in order, that there should be a competency test or something, and maybe it extends to people far younger. How do you feel about that?
I tell you this, Neil, I don't think we need a competency test to know that Joe Biden is no longer competent to be president of the United States. You could see it every day. When you fall asleep in the Oval Office, while the whole media is watching, in a chair across from the president of Israel, I don't think we need to wonder anymore whether Joe Biden is competent to be president of the United States. I don't think we need him to take some kind of medical test. And in the same way as Donald Trump shows his continued anger and selfishness and petulance, 70% of the American people, Neil, say they do not want this matchup to be Donald Trump against Joe Biden, two guys who on Election Day will be combined 160 years old. Past their sell-by date, Neil. And the American people will decide that. And I believe they'll decide on our party before the Republican National Convention next year in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
I know you've been asked this before, Governor, but you mentioned the upcoming debate next month on Fox. But it seems pretty clear that Donald Trump, because he has such a big lead in the polls, why should I bother? What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, I think it's wrong. He owes it to the voters of the Republican Party and to the RNC to be willing to get up there and be compared next to all the other candidates who have qualified. Remember, the RNC set up some pretty stringent qualifications to get on that debate stage. 40,000 donors is no small feat to be able to do. We're now over 52,000 donors. And if people want to help, they go to chrischristie.com and do that. But I think he owes it to folks to get on the stage and do that. And by the way, I've known him for 22 years. I think he'll be there.
Really? We'll do it to under and over on that, Governor. All right. Very good seeing you again. Governor Chris Christie, the beautiful state of New Jersey. Thank you, sir.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.